After forcing Chinese companies out of the country, Niger's oil prices have exploded by over 300%, and now the government deeply regrets its decision. Just last month, Niger's military authorities ordered top executives from several Chinese firms to leave within 48 hours, froze the accounts of Chinese-owned hotels, and seized refineries managed by Chinese companies, all under the excuse of salary disputes. Yet before this fallout, China had been one of Niger's strongest partners, playing a key role in supporting the country's economic development. But less than a week after the Chinese executives left, diesel prices across Niger skyrocketed threefold. Desperate and cornered, the Niger government is now trying to reopen talks with Beijing, hoping China might return and rescue their collapsing economy. So, why did Niger drive out its Chinese partners in the first place, and now that the country is facing an economic nightmare, can China ever trust or assist them again? If you enjoy our content, make sure to subscribe to AY Global so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. Now, let's dive into today's topic. Niger is a landlocked nation in the heart of West Africa. It covers a vast 1.26 million square kilometers, making it the largest landlocked country in the region. Despite its size, Niger's population is only around 27 million, and its economy remains one of the weakest in the world. According to official data, Niger's per capita GDP in 2023 was just $642, far below global averages. The United Nations classifies it as one of the least developed countries on Earth. Still, Niger isn't poor in natural resources. On the contrary, it's actually rich in valuable minerals, especially uranium, where it ranks fourth globally with proven reserves of around 420,000 tons and an annual production of roughly 3,000 tons. The country also holds about 499 million tons of crude oil reserves, making it, potentially one of West Africa's key energy hubs. However, due to limited technology, lack of industrial infrastructure, and honestly decades of underdevelopment, Niger has been unable to properly exploit these resources. As a result, its economy still depends heavily on agriculture and livestock. Unfortunately, most of Niger's land is covered by desert. The dry climate and poor soil make farming extremely difficult, with only drought-resistant crops able to grow, and even those produce low yields. This means the country has to import most of its food to feed its people. On the other hand, livestock farming is relatively strong. Niger has an estimated 30 million heads of livestock, and animal husbandry has become a crucial part of the economy. But despite this, the livelihoods of ordinary Nigerians haven't improved much. In search of a way out of poverty, the government turned to the international community for help, but most nations were, reluctant to offer real aid, and some Western powers even demanded to station troops in Niger in exchange for financial support. A humiliating proposal for the country's sovereignty. That's when China stepped in. For decades, China has been a reliable partner to African nations. When Beijing learned about Niger's economic struggles, it immediately offered support. As early as 2004, China donated 290 tons of fertilizer to boost local food production. Soon after, it provided 11,000 water pumps and spare parts to improve Niger's outdated irrigation systems. But China's help didn't stop there. It assisted in building several major infrastructure projects, including the iconic General Sani Kountché Bridge in Niamey, the capital. The bridge, measuring 928 meters long with connecting roads totaling 2.5 kilometers, links the densely populated western district of Gali with the transportation hub of Lamorde. Construction began in 2018 and was completed in 2021, significantly improving urban connectivity. Yet, China's most impactful contribution came from the oil sector. Back in 2003, several Western oil companies had attempted exploration in Niger, but after assessing the high risks and low profits, they quickly pulled out. China, however, took the opposite approach. It signed a 22-year integrated cooperation agreement with Niger to develop the Agadem oil field, investing billions of dollars in exploration, refining, and pipeline construction. Under Chinese management, the Agadem field began production with recoverable reserves of 324 million barrels. The Zinder refinery, built and operated by Chinese engineers, could process 20,000 barrels of crude oil per day, completely transforming Niger's energy landscape. For the first time, Niger no longer had to import refined oil. Instead, it became an oil exporter. Fuel prices plummeted from $2.50 per liter to just $1, benefiting millions of citizens. China also built a 462-kilometer pipeline across the Sahara Desert, connecting oil fields and refining facilities, forming a complete industrial oil chain. According to official data, this project alone contributed roughly 10% of Niger's GDP and 12.5% of its national tax revenue, while creating over 4,000 jobs. To further expand exports, China also invested in the Niger-Benin Oil Pipeline, a massive project launched in 2021. Spanning 1,980 kilometers, with 1,275 in Niger and 675 in Benin, plus 30 kilometers of undersea pipelines, it was set to become Niger's largest infrastructure project since independence in 1960. When completed, it would allow Niger to export 90% of its oil, transporting up to 990,000 barrels per day. By the end of 2023, Niger had become a recognized oil producer and exporter, earning more than $1.3 billion annually from crude sales. The oil sector made up about 10% of GDP, and IMF forecasts suggested that Niger's economy could grow by as much as 15% in 2024, with oil's share of GDP rising from 4% to 28%. For a nation with a total GDP of less than $20 billion, this was a monumental transformation. And it all came from Chinese partnerships. But in 2025, everything changed. Out of nowhere, Niger's military government began targeting Chinese firms, accusing them of unfair salaries and lack of local hiring. The government argued that Chinese managers earned 3 or 4 times more than local workers. But the truth was far more complex. Chinese workers in Niger often operate in extreme conditions: temperatures above 50 degrees Celsius, exposure to diseases like malaria, and minimal infrastructure. These are not ordinary jobs. Their salaries reflect their expertise, risk, and international competitiveness. Meanwhile, most local employees lack formal technical training, not because of laziness, but due to Niger's weak education system. The skill gap made it impossible to replace experienced Chinese professionals overnight. But salary disputes were only a cover story. The real issue was Niger's worsening financial crisis. By early 2025, the government's foreign exchange reserves had fallen below safe levels, barely covering 2 to 3 months of imports. To make matters worse, in 2024 Niger had borrowed $400 million from Chinese oil companies. When repayment was due, the government tried to delay and renegotiate, demanding a larger oil profit share, from 15% to 30%, something completely unreasonable by industry standards. China refused. Embarrassed and frustrated, Niger's leaders responded aggressively. The military government accused Chinese companies of tax evasion, demanding an impossible $1.1 billion payment, and even requested new loans on top of that. When Chinese executives rejected these demands, tensions boiled over. In March 2025, Niger ordered Chinese executives to leave the country within 48 hours, seized corporate assets, and froze bank accounts of Chinese-owned hotels and refineries. The response from Beijing was immediate. China suspended the Niger-Benin Pipeline project, withdrew key technical experts, and filed an international arbitration lawsuit demanding compensation under the China-Africa Investment Protection Agreement. China also coordinated with the African Union and other international bodies to pressure Niger's government diplomatically. Within a week, the consequences were devastating. Niger's oil production collapsed by 70% as local technicians failed to operate the complex machinery left behind. Refineries ground to a halt, gas stations ran dry, black market fuel prices soared, and even then, supply was scarce. The price of diesel jumped from 60 cents to $2.40 per liter, a more than 300% increase. For a nation where most people earn under $2 a day, this was catastrophic. Electricity generation, heavily dependent on oil, dropped by 80%, leaving entire neighborhoods in darkness. Shops closed, factories stopped running, and daily life was paralyzed. Desperate for relief, Niger's government borrowed 300 tanker trucks of fuel from Nigeria, but it was nowhere near enough. Protests erupted nationwide as unemployment rose and inflation spiraled. Facing social unrest, the military government was forced to spend even more on security, further draining its collapsing finances. Niger has now realized that the cost of alienating China is far greater than it ever imagined. Over the past 2 decades, China has earned a strong reputation across Africa for providing infrastructure, technology, and investment without political strings attached. While Niger's actions have caused losses for China, nearly $5 billion worth of projects were affected. Beijing is unlikely to abandon such a resource-rich country entirely. However, whether China will forgive Niger and re-engage depends entirely on Niger's next move. Trust once broken is hard to rebuild, so, as Niger faces soaring oil prices, economic collapse, and public outrage, one question remains: will China give them another chance? Or, will this mark the end of one of Africa's most promising partnerships? To stay updated on this story and more global developments, don't forget to subscribe to AY Global and turn on notifications. We'll keep bringing you insightful and thought-provoking stories from around the world.